Hi, One Lit Teacher here. Today I'm going to talk about different types of language that Shakespeare uses in his play Romeo and Juliet. First of all, you should recognize that all of Shakespeare's plays are verse plays, which means that they are plays that are really written as poetry, or poetry written into the form of plays. Shakespeare uses blank verse in these plays, and blank verse is unrhymed iambic pentameter, 10 syllables per line, 5 iambs per line. And an iamb is a unit of one unstressed followed by a stressed syllable. If you need a little background in poetic meter or rhyme, I have a video about it on my YouTube channel, One Lit Teacher. But don't be too afraid, because blank verse is really the easiest meter to master. It is meant to mirror the cadence of our language in English. So in other words, the patterning of stresses. We don't speak in monotone, but our accents within our words vary. So I pulled out a couple of lines that you'll recognize from the balcony scene, but you could really pull out any lines from Romeo and Juliet and be pretty sure that they're going to turn out to be blank verse. Here Romeo says, "But soft, what light through yonder window breaks? It is the east, and Juliet is the sun." This is a great example of two lines of iambic pentameter, unrhymed, blank verse. Dee-dum, 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 and so on. 5 units of iambs per line. When does Shakespeare use rhyme? Well, frequently in this play, you'll find rhyming as well. Sometimes for emphasis of emotions, events, or character traits. So for example, when either of the fathers in the play talks about their emotional ties with their children or their concerns for their children, you'll hear a lot of rhyming. So for example, where Montague is talking with Benvolio about Romeo's depression, there's a lot of rhyming. Or when Capulet talks to Paris about a possibility of marrying Juliet. Also in certain events, to sort of highlight the moment, there's a lot of rhyming, or to point out character traits. For example, Romeo frequently rhymes. He is characterized as a lover, not a fighter. He is in fact a Petrarchan lover. He has his head in the clouds, and he is in love with the unattainable woman and pines away for her. That happens both with his love for Rosaline and later for his love with Juliet, which then of course becomes love up close. But if you need some information on Romeo as the Petrarchan lover or the Petrarchan sonnet tradition, please check out some of my other videos on my YouTube channel, One Lit Teacher. But Romeo rhymes so often that when Mercutio and Benvolio are looking for him after the party, Mercutio shouts out into the night, "Ah, Romeo, pronounce but love and dove." And he says, "And then we'll be able to find you." Also, there is rhyming at the ends of scenes, or sometimes in the middle of scenes as well, to signal scene changes. So when new characters are entering, there might be a series of rhyming couplets leading up to that change of the scene. Or you'll notice, pay attention, as a scene is winding down, characters will rhyme with each other or individually present rhyming couplets to signal the scene's end. Because Shakespeare does not pull a curtain at the Globe Theatre in Elizabethan London, nor does he have electricity harnessed to do the dimming of the lights at the end of the scene. So he uses these auditory cues for the audience instead, rhyming. Also, within the sonnets included in the play, there is some very specific stylized rhyming. So, for example, before Acts 1 and 2, Shakespeare has included prologues that are sonnets. They are, in fact, Shakespearean or English sonnets, 14-line poems in iambic pentameter with this very particular rhyme scheme, AB, AB, CD, CD, EF, EF, G, G. These are delivered by the chorus, which is a throwback to ancient Greek theater, tragedy, and the chorus is giving, in the first one, for example, an overview of the entire play, and in the second one, sort of a summary of what's happened so far and what is, in general, yet to come. Shakespeare also very famously embeds a sonnet in Act 1, Scene 5 that Romeo and Juliet execute together. This is where they put their hands together, and Romeo says, "Palm to palm is holy Palmer's kiss," and it's this extended metaphor about how this is essentially a religious pilgrimage that they've made to each other, and now they've found each other. And the idea is, of course, this beautiful sentiment that if these two who have never met before can complete a rhyming sonnet together, then gee, isn't this love at first sight? Isn't it meant to be? That's the impact or the idea behind having a sonnet there in the play. If you look for it, you'll find it there in Act 1, Scene 5, the famous party scene. But Shakespeare sometimes uses prose in the play, which is the opposite of poetry. It is not poetry or verse. Primarily, it is used by the nurse and other lower class characters, servants, to characterize them as uncouth and unpolished, and to call attention to and make fun of their lack of education. It's sort of ironic and peculiar that Shakespeare chooses to do this because most of, or a large part of his audience anyway, is made up of groundlings. These are the uneducated masses in London who have come to watch the play and just paid a penny, and they are standing on the ground. And they are sort of seeing themselves mirrored in some of these characters, and I guess it's just all good humor. But one of the uses of language that occurs with these characters, especially the nurse, is malapropism. This is where the nurse uses the wrong word to get her message across, or frequently the message is just delivered in sort of a jumbled, confused way. And I've pulled out two examples. In Act 2, where the nurse is looking for Romeo to discuss with him the plan about him meeting and marrying Juliet, for example, she's looking for him and she says, "If you be he, sir, I desire some confidence with you." Okay, and the use of the word confidence is a malapropism because what the nurse means is conference, but she doesn't know the right word. Benvolio picks up on this right away and quickly retorts, "She will invite you to some supper," drawing attention to the fact that the word he should be using is invite, but he's making fun of the nurse's use of malapropism here. And the serving man also has some very confused language. So, for example, in Act 1, when he's been given the list by Capulet to invite different people around Verona to supper, to the feast, he complains. Servants aren't supposed to know how to read. It's not one of the tools of the trade. And he coincidentally runs into Romeo and Benvolio, who read the list for him. But before they do, he rants. "It is written that the shoemaker should meddle in his yard, and the tailor with his last, the fisher with his pencil, and the painter with his nets." Okay, and you can see that Shakespeare has the servant mix up the tools used for different trades. Just to sort of point out to us that he's a bumbling idiot, I guess, to make fun of him. Shakespeare also uses soliloquies and asides in the play as important stage conventions. A soliloquy is a solo speech by one character alone on stage, during which the audience is privy to the character's inner thoughts and feelings. It's as if the audience is inside the character's head at this moment in the play, and nobody else knows what's happening. No other characters are on stage. An aside, on the other hand, is a character's remark to himself or to another character or directly to the audience that some characters on stage don't hear. It's as if in real life somebody whispers to another person but the people around don't hear. But on stage, of course, the audience must hear, so the character can't truly whisper, and it's just the effect, the idea that other characters don't hear. There are a lot of soliloquies in the play, mostly by Juliet, a few by Romeo, one by the friar. I'll just give a few quick examples. In Act 2, Scene 5, when Juliet is waiting impatiently for the nurse to return with news of Romeo, and she talks about how lame the nurse is and how slow, we get this inner rant. It's her inner turmoil while she's waiting. It also helps to characterize Juliet as a very impatient child, perhaps one we should be worried about having, be getting ready to marry, because she's clearly not emotionally ready to do that. Or in Act 4, Scene 3, when Juliet grapples with whether to take the friar's potion and what might happen after she does. She talks about how she could wake up in the family sepulcher with Tybalt's bones, for example. And this is her inner conflict about drinking the potion. And we get that inner struggle while nobody else in the play knows that that has occurred. An example of aside, they are sprinkled throughout the play, but for example, in the very beginning, the street scene, the street fight of Act 1, Scene 1, after Abram asks Samson if he bites his thumb at him, this is like flipping the bird in modern day, Samson then asks Gregory in an aside, "Is the law on our side if I say I?" In other words, am I going to get in trouble if I say yes? And Samson replies, no, these are asides. Other characters do not hear them. There's also a lot of witty wordplay or punning in this play. And some important examples occur between Mercutio and Romeo. They are both word masters and they pun frequently in a very inappropriate way. So I'm not going to read all of this, but I put up, after the evening where Benvolio and Mercutio can't find Romeo, Mercutio says, oh, he gave us the slip last night, the counterfeit, and he begins to pun on pump and flowered, making bawdy jokes about female genitalia. But their battle of wits really shows how smart and learned they are. But interestingly, other characters who are not upper class sometimes pun as well. So for example, in the opening scene, it may be a little clunkier than the example with Romeo and Mercutio, but Samson and Gregory banter about coals and words that sound much like carrying coals, collier, collar, collar. And also they make bawdy jokes this way, talking about cutting off the heads of the maids or their maiden heads, their virginity, and suggestive comments come out like, my naked weapon is out. And these are all reliant on puns or words that have double meanings. Shakespeare also uses a lot of paradoxes and oxymorons in the play. A paradox is a statement or situation that seems to contradict itself, but then turns out to be true. Like when Juliet meets Romeo and says, my grave is like to be my wedding bed. Well, that turns out to be true. Or my only love sprung from my only hate. Sounds impossible, but it is true. An oxymoron is a figure of speech which is sort of a tiny version of a paradox that juxtaposes apparently contradictory terms. For example, after Romeo sees that the brawl has occurred in the opening scene, he comes up right afterwards and he says, oh, brawling love, oh, loving hate, oh, heavy lightness, serious vanity, feather of lead, bright smoke, cold fire, sick health. Romeo is sort of reeling off this barrage of oxymorons in that scene. There are also some important allusions in the play, both mythological and biblical. So for example, when Romeo talks about Rosaline and how she'll not be hit with Cupid's arrow and she hath Diane's wit. Diane is a virgin goddess. Also, Benvolio and Mercutio worry about Romeo fighting Tybalt because, alas, poor Romeo, he's already dead, stabbed with a white wench's black eye, run through the very ear with a love song, the very pin of his heart cleft with the blind bow boy's butt shaft. And is he a man to encounter Tybalt? Okay, he's already been struck by Cupid's arrow. He's already love sick. Some biblical allusions are scattered throughout the play, although they're not quite as common as the mythological ones. And I'm not going to read all of this, but this is that famous sonnet where Romeo and Juliet do the extended metaphor about the religious pilgrimage and use words like pilgrim and saints and holy palms and so on. These are biblical allusions. Shakespeare also uses a device called apostrophe. And in this case, it is not a punctuation mark, but instead it's when a speaker addresses someone or something that cannot respond. So for example, in Act 3, Scene 2, when the nurse returns with news that Romeo has killed Tybalt and has been exiled, Juliet speaks to the ropes that were supposed to bring Romeo into her bedchamber that evening. Poor ropes, she says, you are beguiled, both you and I, for Romeo is exiled. He made you for a highway to my bed, but I, a maid, die maiden widowed. Come cords, come nurse, I'll to my wedding bed, and death, not Romeo, take my maiden head. Here you hear that rhyming at this emotional moment, which is also the end of a scene. And also you get a sense of that iambic meter. I read widowed to keep the meter intact. So there are a lot of good ideas in that example. Also, as Juliet begins her soliloquy in Act 4, Scene 3, in which she expresses anxiety about the friar's potion, she says, come, vial. Or before stabbing herself, she talks to the dagger. She says, oh, yea, noise, then I'll be brief. Oh, happy dagger, this is thy sheath. There, rust and let me die. And then, of course, famously thrusts it into her gut. If you enjoyed this presentation on the language of Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, I hope you'll check out my other videos on Romeo and Juliet and my other videos about poetry by Shakespeare, John Donne, and others, as well as videos on other great works of literature on my YouTube channel, One Lit Teacher. Please subscribe. Thank you.